Australians, oh, let us rejoice, for we are young and free, with golden soil and wealth for toil. Our home is girt by sea, our land abounds in nature's gifts of beauty rich and rare. On history's page, at every stage, advance Australia fair. Także kuj! Dzisiaj Australijczyk. Today Australian. To remember that I'm supposed to talk in English as promised. Cannot really do Australian accent. Australian accent's a little bit like English, but more something like this, a combination that is impossible for me to adapt to make the same sounds as they are doing. It's really complicated how they talk, because it's most of the British people I know and who know Australian way of talking, they say that it's really some sort of Cockney accent, a typical working class Londoner accent, but slightly different, evolved, and so on. Because every second week we are supposed to do it in English. Maybe you are not informed. We always do it 1 week Polish, 1 week English. So I stick to our arrangements. So also, yes, because I also sent it to my colleagues to England, to America, to make it possible for them to understand what the Polish audience is interested in, and it's interesting to them too. And sometimes we also have international viewers, not as many as I would like to have, but sometimes we have. So, but it was arranged much time ago, and we already had. It's the fourth, I think, Q&A in English. So yeah, I see that you speak English, so no problem. Even if you don't speak English, it's also not a problem. You just you just put your question to. I have to decide to American or British accent. I prefer American accent, I think so. So I will continue the American accent, although Australian accent is more similar to British accent, but I have to choose one. The Canadian accent is very with Canadians. It's very funny because they do American-like accents westwards from Quebec. In Quebec, they of course speak French, and then from Quebec eastwards, they tend to speak more British-like way, and their spelling is British in all parts of Canada. So they have this la bay, LAB OU, not for labor, for instance, not just O like the Americans, for instance. So, because you've proposed, the group has proposed that we would do those Q&As on weekends. It's impossible, I'm afraid, because I have students mostly on the weekends. So not possible here. But I have proposed instead to start Q&As a little bit earlier. How long it could take to learn a new language on a level that allows you to read philosophical books? Philosophical books, well, that's pretty tall order. Maybe you should start with, I don't know, sociological books about sociology, about history, and then move to philosophy. It's the more easy way, I think. How long it could take. You know, the key element in learning new languages, and I am not satisfied with all languages I use with the level I am using it on. The key element is to having sometimes, um, how to put it. I don't even would know how to put it in Polish, so give me a while. To have to have some contact with this language all the time. So even if you don't practice the language, you it would be wise to have to listen to some videos and so on, to watch some videos from YouTube and so on in that language, in that particular language you are learning. It really helps to make those words, because those are like several thousand words really what you have to know, right, in every language. So when you make those like really existent in your life, then it will go smooth. Yeah, I have voted for Nowoczesna once. Yes, they were liberal. Now they are mostly interested in feminism and the cultural elements like that. But at the beginning, they were really some kind of a liberal party. Yes, and I voted for them once. I voted for Petro. The same was very typical. It's a very typical situation. Also, Ziemkiewicz has described it once, that many parties started as the mainstream liberal parties and then turned very radically to the left after some time. And it's puzzling why they do that, because they lose almost all electorate by doing it, but they do it anyway. So and the same happened with Palikot, with with Janusz Palikot, right? So the same. And it's not only a Polish phenomenon, but it's really something typical for Poland, because it happened many times, whereas in other countries it happens once or twice. Usually the parties, as Ziemkiewicz observed rightly, they start at the close to the wall, to the left wall or to the right wall, and then move to the center to gain more supporters, to gain a better and bigger electorate, and the basis of voters. But they don't do it in Poland. We have seen it many times that there were parties that were started as mainstream liberal parties, mostly common sense parties, not very radical in any element of their program, and then they moved to the radical ends. Name one. What kind of books? About which philosopher? That's interesting. Which philosopher? They are not translated even to English. So in which language they are originally? German, French, Italian? I'm guessing German, because most of the radical, yeah. So I guessed it right. Yeah. Well, yes, some of the books. If it's very interesting. German, Meinländer. It's some modern guy. I haven't heard about him. It's very puzzling that the German language is very much science oriented and also philosophy oriented, because every fifth book in the world that is about some hardcore scientific stuff, like technology and so on, technology, architecture, things like that, infrastructure, and also philosophy, and also several humanities. Every fifth book in the world, 20% is written in German. Although German-speaking people, it's like altogether 120 million people, not more. When you sum up the people who know German and use German as their mother tongue, Muttersprache, and when you add those who learn it at schools worldwide, it's not so many. It tops 20 million. So you put to this original 100 of Germans, Austrians, German minorities in the States, in Brazil, and so on. When you put it all together, and the German Swiss people, German-speaking Swiss people, then you have 100. Then you put some tops 20 million of people who learn German and can really speak German worldwide. So it's barely 120 million people. It's not so much, not so many. I mean, and still every fifth book of hardcore scientific stuff, plus philosophy and several humanities, it's in German, even today. And in, for instance, 1920s, it was even more so. So, Schopenhauer. Why you are all so fascinated with Schopenhauer? I also have this small petty quarrel with Eliot 79 about Schopenhauer, because for me Schopenhauer is he's just the opposite of interesting thinker. For me, interesting thinker is, for instance, Nietzsche. Mindlander. That perhaps I never heard about him, because it's the school in philosophy which I'm not so very fascinated. In which I'm not so very fascinated. Yeah. Although I have announced that we are doing the Q&A at 8:00 p.m., I think some people will turn up at 9 p.m. Yeah. Although I've announced this in every of the the usual places. So tell me, Kacper, when there are no questions, then I can ask one question to you. Why you are so interested in Schopenhauer? Why people are so interested in Schopenhauer? Because he's mainly remembered someone who has put the Asian way of thinking into the European way of thinking. So he served as a link between the Asian way of thinking, the Confucianism, Buddhism, and European way of thinking. Okay. Yeah, Nietzsche is more translated. That's true. Nietzsche is far more translated, because Nietzsche was needed to the European intellectuals when Marxism was already totally exploited, and it was observed that it's really a path going nowhere. So especially in France, which is very interesting, because France was always almost immune to the Nietzscheanist thought when Nietzsche was alive. But when all the Maoism, the neo-Marxism was already spent intellectually, and they have adopted Nietzsche as their main philosopher and the main representative of the new way of thinking in the 50s and the 60s, when the Marxism was already slowing down. In the 60s, 70s, more maybe not. In the 50s, it was still great, thought as a great thing to be a Stalinist, even or Maoist, but not anymore. So and the French have appreciated Nietzsche. Well, Nietzsche was interested in Schopenhauer's thoughts, but Nietzsche's ideas are about different stuff. So they've both observed that the European way of thinking, which was developed, which was developed up to this moment, it was a little bit exploited, and they have tried to put some Persian, Chinese, and Indian way of thinking into it. Oh, I can recommend, yes, many books about 18th century, but there are so many it's hard to pick one now, because 18th century, as you know, it's the main field of my expertise. It's how my all adventure with history started. Although behind me you can see 19th century hats, no 18th century hats. Oh, maybe with the exception of the Napoleonic hat here, because the it was already used at the end of the 18th century. But it's hard for me to. I can recommend some authors. For instance, Pierre Chonu. I can recommend Pierre Chonu. I can also recommend Ulrich Imhoff when it comes to Germans about 18th century. Very good. The best when it comes to philosophy, the best book I have encountered about the 18th century thought, about the Enlightenment and so on, that would be probably Ernst Cassirer's book about Enlightenment. Ernst Cassirer was a really much of an representative of the 18th century thought in the 20th century. So he was a guy who have continued all this way of thinking, and he was really a enlightened liberal. So Ernst Cassirer's books about philosophy, much more than all others books about 18th century philosophy. But there is also Peter Guy. He also wrote a very interesting book about Voltaire, which was entitled uh, "A Poet as a Realist" or something like this. A poet as a realist, something like this. Peter, yeah. Mm, it's funny that they are all Pierres or Peters, like I am. Ernst Cassirer. Mm, oh, Emmanuel Leroy Ladurie. And some are even translated to Polish. Mm, Ulrich Imhoff. Mm, Jeremy Black is also very interesting. One book was translated to. It's more about politics. One book was of Jeremy Black was also translated to Polish, but most are just in English. But it's not a problem, I guess. And yeah, when it comes to more light reading, that would be Antonia Fraser, for instance. Yeah. Mm, yes, Pavel Kowal was someone who was ideologically on the left of the Peace Party. Yes. Well, there are several people like that, so it's hard to say. It's hard to say what caused this, because in that party there are still there's still some place for people like Kowal even today. So uh, he wasn't really forced to go away. For instance, when there were municipal elections for the mayor of Poznan, then the peace candidate was uh, I think his name is definitely Zisk, his family name that is. But what was his first name? Tadeusz, maybe something like this. He's the owner of the publishing house, which is called Ziska ISK, and uh, he was the he was representing the peace party in Poznan, but he was in the same time very critical about those all abortion things and those more churchy stuff of typical for the core of that party. Well, there are two main explanations why American Civil War started, mm, and there are some facts that could make the war start. And for instance, from 1840s already, America, it's such a powerful country that there's not as much threat from outside. So Mexico is beaten. There's from 1830s, it's impossible to invade America by land because with the most powerful fleet in the world, even with the British fleet, it would be impossible to take more than 30 or 40,000 troops with one by one occasion to the soil of the United States. So from that moment on, from 1830s, it was the moment in which United States was not anymore threatened by any foreign power. And then it also wins war against Mexico, so it's really sealed from that moment. So America is totally immune to the attack from outside. And there are still some tensions with the British Canada, but Canada is prone to be invaded by the Americans, but not the other way around. So they are so safe that they can turn against each other and decide the fate of the country inside. So they were so safe that they were able to finish each other, so to speak. The other thing is, of course, the ongoing conflict about the new states and territories and areas, and whether it should be introduced, slavery should be introduced to those new territories or not. And the northern states were generally against, and then the southern were generally for it. So it was the ongoing conflict. And the other thing is the international tendency in the Western world, also in Europe, to start more to start the centralization. And the centralization is visible not only in Abraham Lincoln's policies, but also in Bismarck's policies, also in, for instance, Garibaldi's policies, Camillo Cavour's policies, and even the Pope's policies. The whole doctrine of ultramontanism. That is that all those churches, national churches, should be subjugated to the Vatican very tightly. So the general tendency to centralize. Yeah, I would really prefer, and I have recorded recently one idea about the creating maybe in the future some kind of a conservative party in the British style that has no problems with gays, and it's not talking about abortion all the time, but it's concentrated mainly on keeping the nation safe in its structure, in its culture, and when it comes to borders. That would be the Conservative Party Western European style, and I would be for it. So for me, it's just a huge waste of time to have all these problems about LGBT and so on. Because I have recently heard to Ziemkiewicz's video, and he was talking very justly that Platforma Obywatelska, the civic platform, is completely out of ideas, and if not for the LGBT and abortion and stuff like that, the cultural stuff, merely and purely cultural stuff, they would be totally out of chance of winning any election. So let's take even that from them, right? Let's make a more secular conservative party from peace. And I think it will happen one day, because peace is already mostly promising to the church all the church would want, but still goes without any changes that church would require. So they are mostly giving some money to the church, but mostly ignoring its wishes, and it's good. It should be like that. And I am also happy that peace is keeping Confederacja guarded, and Confederacja cannot really grow. Yeah, also, I said about the ongoing questions about whether the new territories should be in 19th century America, whether they should be provided with the institutional slavery or not. So yeah, that was also one of the causes. But the other thing is the push for centralization, and the other is also that the United States from 1840s, 1830s even, was totally safe when it comes to the possible foreign invasion. So the Americans were in a very good position to fight each other, because they had no threat from outside on the horizon. Already in the high school, I was because I was in my group in high school. We were all supposed to become doctors and biologists and so on. We had more lessons of biology and chemistry, and when it comes to languages, we had German and Latin. And I started to deviate in the last years of high school from that pattern, because I was becoming less and less interested in biology. I still am interested in some fields of biology, in some domains. For instance, when it comes to behavior of animals and studying their behavior and so on, I am very interested still. But for instance, it wasn't so funny for me to find out that biology is mostly, when studying biology professionally, that would be mostly concentrating on the cell. So yeah, not very interesting for me. So I was starting to deviate more to history, and history was in my family always a respected field of interest, because well, my grandpa was fighting in the World War II, so I always was provided with some more information than about history than most people are provided from home. And well, and first, yeah, my first thoughts about history was of course about World War II, but then I turned very quickly to World War One, because nobody was really knowing anything about World War One, and it was shocking for me that nobody really knows what was happening during World War One. And then I turned for a long time to American Civil War. Yeah, actually. And yeah, and I had this big biography of Abraham Lincoln and so on. It was very fascinating for me, and I was writing down all the battles and all the changes which were made in the internal policy of Lincoln during that war, and it really about slavery or only, or maybe there were some other reasons, and there were, as I said. And then I was interested a little bit in the Prussian Franco-Prussian War, which was going on a little bit later in the 70s, mostly in the 1870. And then I was more and more interested in Baroque music, and I remember precisely that moment in which I was reflecting on uh, which was actually the nationality of Bach and Handel and people like that, because I knew that Germany was divided into many territories, into many states, and it was for me shocking that politically Handel was born as a Prussian. He was born in territory which was Prussia, because Halle, where Handel was born, was in Prussia, but he was culturally a Saxon. Also, Bach was from Saxony when it comes to culture, and he was also politically. But his authority over him was the small principality of Sachsen-Eisenach, because he was born in Eisenach. So he was going from one small state to another small state, um, looking for some position he could fill professionally. And it was interesting that they were going from one state to another. So this world of divided Germany, divided Italy, was very very interesting to me. And I also observed that in that world of divided Italy and Germany, France and Britain and Russia, all three, and Austria had so much more power, respectively, to that they could, really use against the rest of Europe, when Germany and Italy was so divided. So the whole world politically functioned in different way than today's world, and that was really interesting to me. So from speculation about private life of Handel and Bach started my interest in political things in 18th century, and all the other things that because 18th century is maybe the least understood of all historic times, because it's relatively recent, but it's also before the revolution, before all big changes started. And it was a world in which we had still we see still Inquisition, but we also see modern newspapers and modern way of thinking, which was not the case in Renaissance, for instance. So 18th century is like yesterday, and still like this 200, 300 years ago. It's no other epoch like this. No other epoch like this. 19th century is like yesterday in all factors. 17th century is like Middle Ages, but a little bit more science, a little bit more of everything. But maybe the late 17th century with Louis XIV and all those Dutch inventions, and yeah, maybe. But it's more in the it's more 18th century way of thinking already. So yeah, so 18th century is like no other epoch. I used to say that several several movies about history, about 18th century, like Jefferson in Paris, are my favorite. But now I consider or Barry Lyndon or Ridicule, a French film, also happening in the last years before the revolution at the court of Versailles by Patrice Lecomte. Very good film. I would say those three several years ago, but now to I enjoy watching totally different kind of films more, like Iron Sky about the Nazis from the moon. I don't know why it is so, but maybe it's too much history, and I recently I prefer to watch non-historical movies. Jumanji and things like that, but Jumanji 2 and 3, not Jumanji the first, because Jumanji the first is totally different genre. Well, my the book I'm recently working on is the book about the history of crisis management from 17 from the years 1720 and something like this, from the plague in to be precise, from the plague that was going on, that attacked Marseille in 1720, up to the today's crisis of Wuhan and all the virus thing. So that's the book, and I am, well, it's still a several, maybe 2 weeks of work, I think. And after that, I plan to write a book about Polish history, but from a very rational, very cold, emotionless way of point of view. Kościuszko and de Gaulle have the luck of having many good books which are written about them. So it's I could just simply recommend all the books about de Gaulle and Kościuszko, because there is not so much controversy about those historic figures. Kościuszko and de Gaulle were sometimes they were sometimes subjects of some ideological quarrels, yes, but they were always appreciated more or less, and it's not the case for most of historic figures. Like, for instance, Bismarck is sometimes portrayed as a rascal, sometimes as a saint, and so on. The same with Frederick the Great, the same with Churchill, the same with Roosevelt. But Kościuszko and de Gaulle were always presented in a positive way, just more or less. Although maybe I could presume that American books about de Gaulle, which are far more critical, because de Gaulle was, they have presented de Gaulle in such a way that de Gaulle was not really appreciating American help, but it's not the case. They were preferring Roosevelt for a long time, just simply and plainly preferred to get along with Vichy than with de Gaulle. He was criticizing the affection that Churchill had for de Gaulle, and he was thinking that de Gaulle is only bragging that he has so much support in France, but has none really. He was thinking that maybe it would be better to talk to Vichy government. So that was Roosevelt's idea. So from this point of view, there is some controversy about de Gaulle, but it's merely connected with these Roosevelt's ideas. About Kościuszko, I have written a small book about Kościuszko. It was mostly about his enlightened way of thinking, about his being a son of enlightenment, ideologically and so on. Whereas most of the book about Kościuszko are about Kościuszko as the great warrior, as the great soldier. And he was really a great soldier. He was a professional soldier. He was a military engineer. He was a very remarkable military figure. But he also was a son of enlightenment. So uh, on it's not so maybe not so shocking for American reader, but to a Polish reader, it's something relatively new. But we also have, when we have the Kościuszko's year, we had several years ago, we had those the whole list of new books about Kościuszko, and some were translations of American books, and those were concentrated on being of Kościuszko as being the son of enlightenment. So he is not so controversial even in that respect anymore. Your family has to do something. I mean, has to do with mathematics and physics professionally, or they're engineers or something, or how does it work? We have established the rule that every second Monday there is a Q&A in English. So if you are intending to complain, then maybe you should not participate. Przemysław. What do you mean that the Christianity will become completely marginalized? I don't think so, that Christianity will be marginalized. I think that because when you look at Christianity, when you look on the countries like, let's take two countries about which I know a bit more when it comes to religion and those more recent changes in it. Let's take Norway and France. In Norway, there is this tendency of people gathering still in churches, even if they are personally atheistic and non-religious, and they still gather in the churches because the religion of God and of Christ and so on, it's turning a little bit to a religion of tradition and of tradition of Norway, of the Norwegian nation and so on. So most of the Norwegian Christians are not really Christians anymore, but they want to be Christians. And if they want to be Christians, they want to participate in the Lutheran Church of Norway. They still go to church, and they still are gathering about and because of religious stuff and religious occasions. So no, it does not require to be deeply religious to have a Christian way of thinking, to have a Christian, to have a Christian ideology around you and so on. No, I think that maybe in those uncertain times, Christianity, even to people who are not really religious, can be something as a very interesting as an ideological offer. And I think that those it's not true when we assume so easily that you have to be deeply religious to respect religion and to live as a religious person. I think not. I think we have this enlightened version of religion, and it's functioning well. And also, you have a small minority which is going deeper. And those, for instance, we see this especially well in France, when you have a as a big chunk, a big part of religious people who are really deeply religious, and they are concentrating on the most traditional way of thinking, and every second uh, priest who is starting their duty, so to say, or service as a priest recently in France, every second of them is of those sede vacante movement, or trident of trident movement, and so on. I don't know, tridentine. I don't know how it is in English. Yeah. So those traditional ways, those traditional versions of Catholicism. So, and the same you can see in Norway when you have people who are not really religious, when they still are gathering about religious stuff, and they so the National Lutheran Church of Norway is really on paper losing no one. No people are not really much, not really many people are disinterested um, in Lutheran religion and participating in Lutheran occasions and ceremonies because of the lack of faith or something like this. So you can have a very cool Christians, very well, even secular Christians. It's not a problem really, but people still want to gather around something. So I think that all those atheistic dreams, and I mean those people who are really cannot digest any religious things in their life, so I mean the people who are very deeply anti-clerical, they imagine that if people are not deeply religious, the churches will fall as a house of cards or something like this. It won't happen. It won't happen. People will need to gather still around something, and this will the churches can be not a majority organizations or something like this, but they will be a very powerful minority, and they will still have much influence over what is happening in those countries. We tend to overemphasize the spiritual element. I think the social element of Christianity is really what is making churches powerful, and Christianity, and Christianity existing in our lives. So not the deep stuff, not the spiritual stuff. I think the social element is the most powerful. For instance, take even in my totally atheistic. For instance, I don't remember. I don't believe in Jesus being anything besides the historical figure. I'm not even certain if he existed, which is normally and which is perfectly fine, because with most of the ancient historical, most of the ancient historic figures are really unknown to us. Really, we don't really know if Socrates existed. We don't really know if Homerus was a we know Homeric works, literary works, but we don't know if one person really wrote them, or maybe a set, a team of people. We don't know. So it's normal in ancient times when it comes to knowing about ancient times. But still, I think that when I think about what the radical left is doing, when I think about what about the new version of Islam and so on, then even I, most secular, one of the most secular people I know, and I know what is happening here or here, even I tend to be more sympathetic to Christianity. So I guess that it's happening to people which are really secular, also in en masse. So it comes to it. This way of thinking comes to many people. So yeah, and the most anti-clerical people I know tend to think that religion can be only built upon very deep feelings. No, no. and they are even mocking religious people for not being religious enough. And who are they to tell the religious people in which way they should be religious? It's absurd. It's like a religious people would tell me what sort of atheist I should be. Fuck off. Yeah, it's absurd one way and it's absurd the other way. Yeah, I also understand and approve of the Norwegian approach. I think it's something. Yeah, of course we have also those tendency of to to have those Lutheran and other Protestant churches a little bit fractured. When you have more liberal, socially liberal people of faith who are going to liberal priests, and some are going to conservative priests because though they are conservative or liberal and they are looking for the priest who would they agree with them. And in Catholic countries it's a little bit different, but as I said already, we have a very similar tendency in Catholic France, which is that you have those cool Christians which are not so deeply believing, for instance, but you also have this the other group which is more focused on these deep religious feelings and on tradition and so on. So you don't really, all in all, you don't really see the crushing of the religious faith. I mean, in when it comes to the social element of it. So yeah, we have maybe because atheism existed always, and it was forbidden to talk about those feelings. So we don't really know when mass atheism, when atheism of masses started. So all those. Just like we don't know really much about private lives of any people before like 1600, 400 years ago, if they were they not were they not like aristocrats or some other powerful figures like that. So and we tend to assume many many things about their private lives, although we don't really know how their private lives looked like. I am not a football fan, just the opposite. I think sport, when you are not doing it, like playing football yourself, is a totally it's a total waste of time. It's the stupidest thing you could do to observe other people in short panties. You know, I think it's also a little bit gay to observe people in pants, short pants, walking around and kicking some ball. I think it's gay a little bit, much more than ballet even. Nothing wrong about it, but I'm really always shocked when people say it's so very manly. Well, they kick each other sometimes and pretend that they thought their leg was a ball, but so manly, very manly indeed. Well, I have recently read much about Nordic mythology and Nordic religion, Nordic gods like Wodan or Odin and Thor and so on, because I wanted to know a little bit more about the background of Sweden, and I was writing a book about 18th century Sweden, and now I found a publisher, but it will take some time to publish it. But I've also read much about Nordic mythology. Not maybe not much, several books about it. And what really strikes me is that the Nordic mythology is so very much individualistic than those gods, and like Thor, for instance. Thor is really someone who is, mm, well, some kind of an adventurer. And it's not typical for having in the religious mythology a god like this, an adventurer, an inventor to some degree. So it's very much. And when you study the society of Vikings and all other medieval Scandinavians, because we cannot call all those Vikings, because Vikings were only the warriors and supported by some peasants who were whose occupation it was to organize those kinds of raids against coasts of different countries for robbing them. But mm, but it was also this very striking individualism in this condition-based cooperation, in those very limited, um, mm, very limited. Um, how's the word? What's the word? Well, they were not really believing so much that their political leaders should be trusted all the time. I mean, the mistrust was very dominant, and the individualistic approach that they were all people who really they were all to some extent self-made men, and they were not many slaves, and they were many people who were and that the individualistic approach in all versions in almost all domains of life were highly appreciated. Even, for instance, when you went to your neighbor's house, you could borrow something from that house, and he could not say nothing. He could say nothing, but he could go to your house and take it back, and it was okay. So not so much about private property, but still you could take it back. So not a problem here, and you could even rob your neighbor if provided that the neighbor was a strong, able man, a warrior, for instance. You could rob a warrior if he was your neighbor, and that was okay. But if he was weak or old or sickly, then it was considered well, not a sin, but a very mean deed, and you could even finish with being sent to Iceland to have your, to so that your head would cool off a little bit, because it's too warmed up. It was the usual way of thinking about those people who are too much adventurers of an adventure of an adventurers of adventurers. Sorry. Yeah. I was watching women's sports. I liked volleyball, yes, to watch volleyball because of the shapely legs and so on, but not as much as, I don't know, any movie, for instance, any fabular movie. So sport is not really doing it for me. So, yeah. We are approaching the point of we're approaching 9 p.m., and I wonder if we will have an influx of people who didn't get the information that we are starting at 8 p.m. today. Yeah, I totally understand watching women sports for women. For instance, although, for instance, the women who are playing basketball are a little bit strangely built sometimes, so maybe not that, but yes, but to some extent, yes. But I can, for instance, when it comes to football, I am watching sometimes the international championships, because then you have the opportunity to see how the national way of thinking, the national way of playing, which is totally connected because everything is connected to the national way of thinking, and you can see which teams, which national teams are playing more individualistic in the individualistic way, and which are more playing in more, much more herd way, and so on, like a herd. And that's interesting, and that's interesting, and also the reaction of football fans. But I totally cannot understand the need to see the national championships, for instance, when the way of playing is similar from one team to another. No, I don't think that people who thinks that they are sinners but does not discriminate are homophobic. No, no, homophobic are people who are vocally, very often and aggressively talking against those people, and people who. It's very funny because sometimes people say that phobia is really a way of. It's a sort of fear, and I don't really see that it's really what homophobia is. It's a fear. I don't think that it's a fear. I think it's connected to rage against them, a little bit disgust, because people are tend to be over imaginative, and they think about themselves in the situation as if they were in the gay relationships, I think. And here comes the disgust, because people cannot really imagine it, because they are not drawn to another sex, the same sex. They are they are attracted to opposite sex. So here comes the disgust and hate. But they are not really supposed to. It's not needed for them to imagine themselves in that situation, in a relationship like that. So no, I think it's more about hate and disgust, and I think it's more about the over imaginative way of thinking. And I think it's more, homophobia also starts from the idea that it's so very easy to make people who are not gay gay, and there is absolutely no proof of this. There is absolutely no proof. There are many studies that shows that it's absolutely inborn, or maybe if not even inborn, it's so early developed. I mean, the general tendency to be attracted to the same sex or something like this, to people of the same sex, that it's really very well. If it were not causing a social conflicts, I would say it's very funny that people think that it's so easy to make people who are not gay gay, because they are showing them that being gay is okay or something like this. When you when people are informed that being gay is okay, then they people who are gay are still gay, but maybe they don't blame themselves. Yeah, that's the only thing that can happen. And maybe the other way, the other thing that could happen is the people who are heterosexual and very unfriendly to gays, from whatever reason, they maybe can abstain from discriminating or persecuting people who are gay. So informing that being gay is okay is okay. So there's no harm in it. But people think that that some gay instructors can turn their child to be gay. It's very funny, because yeah, it's very funny. We could argue if some things are maybe too early demonstrated to children. I don't know. That's a totally different discussion. Yes, but still, yes, yes, Falun Gong genocide. The Falun Gong was mostly dispersed, not persecuted physically so much, but some of the leaders of Falun Gong sect, because Falun Gong was a sect that counted many souls, like 100 million, and then that precisely that caused the anxiety of the Communist Party because they were no more numerous than the Communist Party of China. So they decided to ban all those Falun Gong, well, local parts of this movement, because Falun Gong is, according to the best experts on China, including my favorite Guy Sorman, they are suggesting that Falun Gong is something of an inborn movement that was a spontaneous reaction to the communist policy of destroying the culture and the cultural fabric of the old China, to distracting of the reaction to destruction of Confucianism, of Taoism, and so on, or limiting it to a very to the mere caricature of what it was previously. So they have spontaneously risen, and their numbers scared the Communist Party, and they banned those organizations, sects. It's hard to say what they really were. Was the spiritual element most important, or maybe the way of thinking more important, or way of living more important? But they were all driven by the nostalgia for the old China, of thousands of temples, of thousands of gods, of local gods, and so on. Whereas, for instance, in 19th century, it was typical for China to have several thousands temples of Confucius, whereas in today's China have only a couple of them, because communists destroyed all the others. The communists destroyed almost all of them, and that really makes you thinking, right? So they destroyed basically the finest elements of their own culture. So people reacted against it. The Falun Gong was the nostalgia movement, and it was banned. But then the Falun Gong people, in number like 2 or 3 million, came to Beijing, and the communists got scared. Although they were totally peaceful, it was a very silent demonstration. They were totally peaceful, but the communists, so they withdrew the prohibition of developing such sects, or I don't know, gatherings and so on. And then when the Falun Gong members, so to speak, went back to their houses, to their homes, and there were not anymore those Falun Gong crowds in Beijing, then the Communist Party reestablished the ban. So it was banned again. And then the Falun Gong people were persecuted sometimes dispersed, sometimes some leaders were arrested. But, to persecute all the people who were involved in those kinds of movements, it would mean to persecute like 100 million of people, like one for every 15 Chinese. So, of course, they were not all persecuted, or they were only, their activities were hindered, and some of the leaders were arrested. Yes. So, yeah. But still, when I was like, when I was a student, in my early studying years, it was totally normal to have all the time some conferences which were totally about the Tibet and Tibetans and Dalai Lama, and it was going on and over and over and over again. Whereas today, I see no such thing. So one campaign of distributing leaflets about Falun Gong, it's not really doing it for me. I still think that we have like a flood of pro Chinese information. The institutes of Confucius, which is the mockery of Confucius. The people who destroyed Confucianism are exporting their communist ideology in form of institutes of Confucius. It's the really biggest joke on the planet, and it's everywhere. The pro-Chinese, the pro-modern Chinese things, informations, opinions all the time, because all people are wondering if one day they will be maybe working for a Chinese company. Yeah, so they don't want to be at odds too much with the Chinese communists. But in the same, but it's nothing like it was before, when the Tibetan problem was the most spoken of problem on the planet, and Tiananmen was popular. I mean, in the way that it was studied all the time. And now it's like 1 year passed and nobody mentioned around me about Tiananmen. Maybe once in some, I don't know, Jacek Bartosiak's presentations there was something about it. Yeah, but it was when I was studying history, when I was a young student, and when the first or the second year of the studying process, then it was you know accustomed to it was a widespread custom to discuss the Tibetan problem, the Dalai Lama. Do you like Dalai Lama or not? And so on. So no, I don't see any I don't even during this virus problem. I don't see as many critical remarks about China, not even close as what I was encountering when I was a student. Not necessarily, because when the fictional characters have their race change in movies and TV, well, it could, if they started being white people and then they have, but even the latest James Bond was believed to be. Uh, Everybody expected that James Bond will be a black girl or something like this, but it's a bit woke a little bit. The result, I mean, from the footage, from the trailers that could be seen, but not even close to what people imagined that it would be. So I think that it's not so common. Or I don't I cannot imagine any fictional character that started as a white and then continued as a black man or woman. I don't recall. But I can understand being upset a little bit when, I don't know, Catherine of Aragon or somebody like this, or I don't know, uh, was because it's from one point of view I can from on the well, I can understand that black actors would like to have a broader spectrum of roles they could take, right? The broader spectrum of characters they could play. I understand that they would like to make it broader, that they would like to play also in films that are happening in medieval England. For instance, there were absolutely no black people back then. But even on Netflix, it's very, very rare when I see something like this, like African Americans or something, or someone like that playing medieval characters. So it's not so common as the memes that the memes could be suggesting, on Facebook or something like this. So yeah, when they are changing anything about the character, the fictional character who is liked as it was before, when it was, well, conceived, when it started to be, when they liked character that had some characteristics is changed, and you are already, well, not liking this character, then it's, of course, it's perfectly understandable that you don't like much change done to it, right? So for instance, if there was a black character and I would like that character as it was, and then it would be changed to white character, was also would be a little bit strange, right? Yeah. Which field of basic fundamental research, including humanities, give, in your opinion, the best tools to describe the reality in terms of socio-political aspects? I don't really understand. I understand every word of what you wrote, but I don't understand the general, uh, the general assumption. I don't understand what you really would like me to say for on responding to the question. Humanities are all interconnected. So cannot say that I'm a sociologist and I'm not n- never historian, because it's not possible. In humanities, there are, because humanities, as the name already is showing us, all is concentrated about the human activities. So human activities are one entity. They cannot be really divided into many things. So it's hard it's hard to say which elements, which of the humanities are the best, or something, the best tools. Because humanities have this problem that you have the human activities, and you cannot really separate human activities in such a way that would enable you to make an experiment. We know that people have different way of thinking. Even if you make two groups of people and you give them tasks, and when you compare the results between two groups of 1,000 people each, for instance, then you have no knowledge as certain as when you have a physical experiment or experiment in chemistry. When you have the laboratory and you have things which are not alive, and you have objects which are not alive, and you can really compare them. They have no feelings, no past, which would make the experiment harder. So the interesting thing is that we don't really know also the psychology of rats, for instance, or monkeys. So when you compare two monkeys in the experiment that it has something to do with biology and animal behavior, then you also can get a pass that, okay, it was an experiment of some sort. But when something involves people, and we are people, and we know how people are complicated, and how complicated is their thinking, and how much their past is, how much influence their past and their experience have of them on them. So you cannot really separate, yeah. And especially in sociology or in history, it's impossible, because then you have whole structures like countries or cities, and the countries or cities are developing in center, if in certain way, and they are developing in certain direction, so to speak, and you cannot really imagine how this city or this country would look like in different, if it were moving in different direction. So you cannot have really the the section of reality cut off from the rest of reality, so that you could have the real empirical experiment with two versions of reality. So That's why humanities are humanities. So they are all fallible. They are all weak when it comes to science. What makes humanities stronger is that you have to understand which elements of human thinking can affect the results. For instance, I was doing a small video about how the hygiene, how people have if the people were in 17th century, for instance, dirty or more dirtier than today. It's not so easy to answer that, because people are not clean. I mean, clean, washed up. They are not clean because they like to be healthy. So when we are judging people from the 17th century who are dirtier than we are, perhaps we don't know that really. But when we assume that they were probably a little bit dirtier, then we judge them for not being hygienic enough. But according to their knowledge, most of the illnesses were transmitted by air. They were thinking that even the illness, which is we know today, it's caused by bacteria and the dirt or something like this. Then they thought it to be transmitted by air. So there is no connection in their minds between being dirty and being healthy. Yeah. So they were, to some extent, totally unhypocritical about being clean, because they were clean sometimes, yes, and sometimes dirty. And when they chose to be clean, to wash up, then they were doing it because it was pleasurable. And the libertines, and we know that for a fact, were clean. Whereas the people who were thinking that everything which has to do with the body is sin, they were not clean. Typically, because there were exceptions on both sides. So, yeah. And so you see that we have people who are claiming to do, for instance, sports for health, but they are doing it for endorphins, not for health. They are doing it for pleasure. Yeah. So we must first and foremost in humanities realize that people are full of shit a little bit, and then start thinking. Yes, that people like to deceive each other and deceive themselves, and then make some assumptions and so on. And people usually don't do it. They want to judge other epochs. They want to feel better than people in 17th century, where there's no real reason to think that. I would say the opposite. The people in 17th century, they knew that if they were sailing on the Mediterranean, in the Mediterranean, for instance, they could be kidnapped by a Moroccan pirate, and they had to think. Whereas today we have this illusion of safety, and we can afford to be stupid in high numbers, right? So, yeah. I don't want to interfere in the creative process. I'm not that strict about but I can tell exactly why can I be upset about it and feel it anyway. Yes, yes, of course. When you understand what is happening, that does not mean that you understand the old what is going on, and it does not mean that the being upset will automatically go away. So, yeah. I can understand why it's upsetting for people to see a character of the historic figure that really existed and lived, and we know that this historic figure was looking that or like that or like that, and even that uh, people would choose to satisfy some modern cultural needs to put the actor who is not looking that at all. But for instance, it would be funny to see how it would be, for instance, because we can see the historical reconstructors, historical reenactors and reconstructors. It's not always the same. It's a topic for another discussion about reconstruction and reenactors. Reenactors are more about the events that really happened, and reconstruction are mostly only reconstructing the general look of the era. So okay, but we can see reenactors and reconstructors, mostly reconstructors, which were far more numerous. I'm also a historical reconstructor, not reenactor, who are in Japan or Korea, and they are wearing historical clothes from Europe, from 16th century Europe, for instance, or from World War II. It doesn't matter really. And we see that their faces are not looking a little bit exotic when with the, I don't know, Wehrmacht uniform or something like this, right? But they are still doing it because they are doing it for fun, and it would be a little bit strange to prohibit them for to hinder them from doing it, right? So from doing that hobby. So, but that is not the problem we have encountered. Most of the nations like to do films about themselves. So if there was a country which was a very well which in the past was very monolithic when it comes to ethnicity, like America, and then you have the multiracial society in the same spot several, like 100 years later, then it's a real problem. But because it happens only in the Western countries and only as some of the Western countries, not all of them, and we really have this problem about black actors playing Robin Hood, for instance, who was not black. He was really called Edward Hode, not Hood, Hode, and he was living. He lived 100 years later than he's thought to be living in. He lived in Edward Hode lived in 14th century, not 13th century, and not 12th century. Well, lived in something like early 1300s, something like this. So, but even if Robin Hood was living in a slightly different period of time, then he was definitely white male, right? So imagine that. So the problem that we cannot deal with this situation is the result of the reality, which is that only in United States that really can happen, and it really can only have something to do with the Latinos and the African Americans, right? So, and that's why we have no general idea which would make some sense of the truth. If we had like a bunch of movies which were about 18th century America done in Japan with only Japanese actors, maybe we would have some general idea how to deal with this situation, but we have not. We have not that. We are not as globalized as we like to think that we are. Yeah. I have read one book by Camille Paglia. I don't recall the title. I have watched many interviews and lectures done by her. Yeah. Excluding humanities, where I'm dealing with humanities all my life, so it's not a good question to be addressed at addressed to me. Yes, it's there is much more. There are much more examples of using highly feminist characters, like a woman that clearly weighs not much more than 80 pounds, but it's still beating the crap out of a man who is clearly weighing like 200 pounds with some kung fu shit, right? So, yeah, that was even mocked in one of the Die Hard parts. I think Die Hard 3. Yeah. There was a small Asian woman, like 40 kilograms of weight, and she was beating the crap out of Bruce Willis. And Bruce Willis said at one point, okay, enough of this feng shit. Feng shui meant to feng shui or feng shui. There are many way of pronouncing it. Feng shui or feng shui made into feng shit. So enough of this feng shit, and made a couple of punches, and then she was beaten up. And he even uh, threw her down the some sort of well of an elevator or something. Elevator well, I think. So not only this thing is very common, it has even the um, it already gained some parodies. This topic of using these over strong women, which would clearly not win against the heavy male, but they still are winning because because we don't really know why. Because I think that some people would like to suck up to women a little bit, and I understand the will of some women who don't want to be pushed around by men, because men have really dominated history for a long time. Of course, we can mention like Pompadour or Cleopatra, the women who are using some formal or informal ways of imposing their will on men and on people in general. But I am not shocked that women having the equal rights today, they are celebrating it by making a stupid scenes in the movies, for instance. Yeah, but still it's changing nothing. For instance, women are still afraid of men on the dark street, for instance. They know that typically men would be much stronger than they are, and they are in danger if any man they would meet would be uh, aggressive towards them or something like this. So it really does change nothing, but still such scenes are produced, not as many as it used to be, but still. Yeah. Ah, yeah, yes. Well, this influence of endorphins when you do sports, it it is being analyzed. It was analyzed, but I don't really know if this will change the general idea that people like to make themselves virtuous. It's called virtue signaling. Even if they are doing and the taking care of your own health or the health of your family or friends, it's a definite virtue, and it's, well, it's very justly so. But people are doing many things because of pleasure and satisfaction. So things that are not really seen as virtues, and still they try to impose on other people the idea that they are doing it to be virtuous. Yeah, and that's the the thing with, for instance, somebody is weak and very easy to intimidate, so they prefer to come up as pacifist. Yeah, people are easily scared, and they are weak, and their mind is weak, and they like, for instance, the same applies to countries. Some countries are not really so sure of themselves, and they want to be seen as pacifists, not as cowards, although they usually are cowards. Most of the pacifists are really cowards. Not all of them. Not all of them. There's some principled pacifists, yes, but out of principle. But those are the minority, I'm sure. Yes, the biological knowledge gave tools to understand the social behavior. We also have the very developed, and it's interesting. I also got interesting a little bit in it, although I'm not a specialist to be asked about complicated things like that. But I get the general idea that it's possible to see, for instance, different part of the brains which are stimulated because of some behavior, because of some questions, because of some connections in thought and behavior, and you can see which elements of the brain are stimulated, um, which are put, which are standby, which are on standby, which are totally off, and so on. And I think what we are going to see in the next years, it will be such puzzling and controversial, findings, like all people are racists. I'm sure that all people are racists because we are biologically programmed that um, we should trust people who are similar to us and distrust people who are not similar to us. It can not only apply to the look, how do we look, or how we look, not on the physical elements, but on the color of the skin or something like this. But it also applies to the way why we are to the way we behave. For instance, like the Italians have the natural trust of people who are using gestures, gesticulation, and they are gesticolare, and people who are from the northern part of Europe, they are more trustful of uh, in the presence of people who are not using those gestures. Yes, who are more controlled and so on. So also gestures, way of walking, way of talking, way of everything. Yes, and we are all racists in this. So we will see this on the areas of our brains, on all those parts of the brains. We will see it, I'm sure. Yeah. So, and we also will see many other things. There is a couple, I think, in Australia or in United States. I don't really remember. I have read about it in Michael Schmidt-Salomon's book. Michael Schmidt-Salomon is the modern is today's German philosopher and atheist, and also an atheistic, so to say, activist. And he said that there is a couple in one of those Anglo-Saxon countries, I don't remember which one, uh, who are interested in having their brains analyzed, so to speak, all the time, so that they would know every little thought about each other. And they have sworn to each other that they will be not discouraged from being together, although they will know all the, well, possibly painful thoughts about each other, right? Well, oh my god, she has so many wrinkles. I could never fuck this ass anymore, like this. And he is so clumsy. I don't really know how can he keep his uh, penis within his pants or something like this. And they will know all those thoughts, and still they have sworn to each other that they will stay together. Although people are very cruel. We are all the time we are concealing how much we think about our us and how little about other people. But they know it, so maybe their marriage can be preserved after all. So there are experiments like that, yes, and I am aware of the fact, yes. Mm, but Gombrowicz took characteristics of Dorian Gray, or of took some elements from the plot of Oscar Wilde's book. I don't understand which you are asking about. Is there any realistic scenario when societies like in USA, France become mono-ethnic again? Well, yes, when everybody are mixed, and it's possible. I remember, and it was very striking to me and very interesting when I saw an African American user of YouTube who was complaining all the time about the mixing. He was complaining that many of his friends have white or Latino girlfriends, and they will have babies who are not black enough for his taste. So yeah, but it's happening. So yeah, people will be. He said that all people will be light brown, like sand, the color of sand. And I always was shocked that people who are making all those movies which are with plots happening in the future, and they know about mixing, and they never, almost never, we see characters that would look like this light brown. Why not? That would be fantastic. We will look like ancient Egyptians again, because ancient Egyptians were exactly that, the Numidian part and the northern part. Yeah, the people in India, they also look like that, because they have this Dravidian element, the darker skinned, and the dark skinned, and the Aryan element, from the Central Asia, which people look a little bit like us because we are the descendant of them. Yeah. So people can be mono-ethnic again because of the mixing. Of course, there are some cultural groups, like Jamaicans in London. They are prohibiting their girls to have, relationships with people who are not Jamaicans, and also people of dark-skinned people who are not Jamaicans. Not only white people, not only Asians, no, not only people from India or something, no, just Jamaican or nothing. You can have sex with people who are not like you, but not have babies, not have real relationships. So yeah, atheism, right? This is atheism. Yeah, and still, but still, the mixing is taking place, and I think the people will be all having a skin like brick. Yeah, in the color of bricks. Yeah, I doubt if we will have a mass murderers like Stalin or Mao in the nearest future, not because people are scared, maybe the two, because everything is connected. If you do anything cruel in this world, will be automatically compared with Stalin, or something like this, like Stalin's actions and so on. So that's discouraging. The other thing which is discouraging is the one radical ideology, for instance, on the internet, is encountering after several seconds already another radical movement that is going in the opposite direction. So it's not easy to amass all this negative energy in one direction. It's not so easy to cut off the influence of other radical or non-radical ideas. So you have the mixture of ideas all the time. And that's why the internet is doing something of a good job, after all, because it's making our world too complicated to understand, maybe, and that's frustrating. But also, it's making this world too complicated to be dominated by one radical, murderous ideology, I think. And the other thing is that we already know what will happen if we start the war, because we have satellites and we see which country have which type of bombs, and how many of them. Yeah. So this also will. So internet and satellites, to some extent, to a very big extent, limit the possibility of having very cruel dictators, mass murderers of this political sort. It's not impossible, of course, and unfortunately, but it's less probable. For instance, what happened with what enabled to murder so many civilians in the first half of the 20th century was that we were all moving towards mass democracy. Mass democracy. There were many thinkers which were depressed by that, and were seeing the dangerous elements of it, of this evolution. For instance, Gustave Le Bon, the psychology of the psychology of the crowd, right? His book. Or Jose Ortega y Gasset, who said that people are not accustomed to voting, to elections. They will elect the most radical people who would promise anything, right? For instance, like Hitler, like Bolsheviks, and so on. And the same was written again by Erich Fromm after it all happened. So, but it was really not so much a huge discovery anymore. It's more important what people were writing before it all happened. So it was a very interesting turn of events. It was a march towards a mass democracy in the world which never experienced a mass democracy before. The whole world were monarchies of some sort, or some tribal countries and societies, or countries in which you had something like piracy going on, or countries which would have a limited democracy, very, very limited, like in 17th century Holland, in which you had the people who voted, but and were represented, or something like this, but still it was all dominated by all those magistrates and the people who were gaining political importance in local communities, and they were really ruling all that was happening. And they were even making those contracts which were called Contracten van Correspondentie with each other, and to promise to each other the support on the high offices, for the high offices. And it was done like this. And in the late 18th century, there was some revolt starting, and around the economical Maatschappij, it was societies that were interested in economy formally, because they could not say that they are interested in politics and in changing politics of the Netherlands, right? So the Republic of Netherlands. So they were all economische maatschappij, the economical institutions, economical societies, and they changed it. They changed the nature. They started the Dutch Revolution, which started 2 years before the French Revolution, which swallowed the Dutch Revolution. So it's all new. The mass democracy is new, and sure, it was bound to happen, to have something radical going on, like Hitler, Stalin, and so on, because of the size of the difference, because it's the biggest difference that I can think of in history. We can see a big difference today, which is that the media, television channels, and so on, they are all creating a false reality to some extent, especially CNN and channels like that, and MSNBC. Mostly left-leaning media are doing this, but sometimes the right-leaning media also do that. So that's radical. That's something new. Will it cause some, dangerous games between the governments and people? Maybe. Some massive clashes against the media? Yeah. But will it take form of some other world war? I doubt it. So, because it's not so. There are still many people who don't just give a fudge about what is happening in politics, and don't give a fudge that the media is lying to them. And probably it will be never be as frustrating as the mass democracy was, with all the promise and which were not fulfilled, and in the last part of the 19th century and the early 20th century, it's incomparable. Our frustrations with lying media, which is lying even more, because when the Soviet Union collapsed, the Western media had no ideological enemy. They could. It's even called it's even this phenomenon is even called. It has a formal name in historiography. It's called liberal consensus. The liberal consensus is that, okay, I am a conservative, you are a left winger. Okay, but we still have the Soviet Union against us. So we have to agree that we live in one reality still. But when the Soviet Union is gone, and the danger of China, for instance, or Cuba is minor nuisance only, but the danger of China is not really realized, then we can pretend to believe that we are living in other realities, different realities. So, and this is frustrating for people who see the lies, but there are not many. Too little number of people to make a revolution, to make what is happening in the United States, for instance. It's not the war against the Republican Democrat war. What we see is the transforming of the United States from a very strict federation to a very much decentralized confederation, very loose confederation, when almost every element is really regulating on a state level. And so we will have this. We will have, because of the lying of the media, and we will have this world in which you have a Republican president and you have the sanctuary cities, or you have the Democrat president and you have like Biden, and you have people who in Republican states who are sending their national guard troops to secure the border. This is doing for spite, and this is doing for spite. Yes, this is happening for spite, and this is also done for spite. So people are not really respecting the rules of each other anymore. So conservative states do one thing, and the liberal or really socialist state, progressive states are doing something completely opposite. And that's the future maybe of the world, but it's not the material, it's not the basis of for a good world war, for a good gulags or something like this. I would say so. It's nice to have radical ideas. It's nice to have a good scenario for a book, good plot for a book like Mr. Philip Dick would write, or some other Kurt Vonnegut or something like that, to make people shocked, to shock people. And but I don't really think that there is enough power, enough frustration, and because the frustration is already regulated in such a way that we can see that one regions are doing completely opposite things to, for instance, we have the also the we have the unionist movement in the European Union, and so what? Every country is doing more and more and more. Every country is on its own. Every country is less and less respecting the rules of Brussels. So we have the same. The same we can see in the regions of India and maybe even in China, although the Communist Party is like keeping it all together at all costs yet. But I think that globalization will result in the end of revolutions to some extent. The revolutions will be only small, and all politics will be more and more regionalized. So when you push too much in one direction, then you have the something else, right? That's not possible. We can see that mixing is taking place, so there is no way we should not be cut from reality. There is mixing, and the mixing will have results. This is what is happening, and we must have the stomach for it, and not pretend that we can imagine the world without mixing, because it's not happening. What is happening is mixing. Of course, it's still preferable for some reason that people who look similar rather would have, uh, even if it's not based on look or the race or ethnicity, they would have, for instance, a Filipino woman and Polish men, or Polish woman and Filipino men in America, because they are all both Catholics. So you have many identities which are intertwined, but still, and those, when do you have something in common, then you get married, right? But it does not necessarily have to be the way you look. So there is mixing taking happening, and that's what's happening. So it's an absurd to assume that we could imagine the world without mixing. That's precisely what we cannot do in humanities, because we have no laboratory that in which we can cut an element of society from another and have two scenarios in which in one you would have mixing and in another you would have not. This is exactly what you cannot do in humanities, because it's absurd. It's contrary to reality. You can only observe, describe, and you can assume some things. That's what you can get. This is as much as you can get from humanities. That's why they have this semi-scientific status, not really scientific, not 100%. It's like one would think that physics or geometry or chemistry, it's like 100% hardcore knowledge. Then history and philosophy, it's something like 50% knowledge, so like softer knowledge. And literature and more subjective elements of reality, like literature and so on, very soft knowledge, something like this. I would say so. Softer and harder types of knowledge. That does not mean that you cannot have a physicist which would go and say total rubbish, and you cannot have a historian or a professor of literature that would not make sense in during his lectures. Of course, you can have. Mm, Gavin Newsom has did many controversial things in California, but he was rescued by the by Trump. And when it came to the worst, which is the fires in California, which were fires in California have many reasons, and sometimes I think that Californian leftists are not really dealing as they should with the problems, because the widespreading fires could be used as the example of the impact that is done by the so-called global warming, right? So they are not doing their job to some extent. But this is a little bit like a conspiracy theory, I know, but I don't say that they do precisely this and only this and always this. I merely say that it's possible that they are not doing 100% of what they could be doing against those fires, not necessarily because they are incompetent, which they are sometimes, but also maybe because of that. That's only what I'm saying. Well, we hear so much about this rapid progress in computer technology, but it's still what it has really changed in our lives, that we can connect to somebody faster. Still, it's not so much changed, because the computers can be, computing very fast and still have no way of, because we don't really know what is creating identity, what is causing the machine, what would cause the machine of think about itself. And like in Terminator movies, that they would know that they have some identity, they should be protecting this identity, maybe against men, or maybe inventing stuff for securing their position in our human society for the machine, for this particular machine. Or maybe what the machines would really do, maybe they would kill all the other machines, they would have the urge to kill all the other machines to secure their monopoly for good treatment by men. That's also possible. Why we assume that machines would have the general identity like human? I would say have, but wait a minute. Humans kill each other, right? So why the machines would not kill each other also? Right? So not so much changed because of this rapid progress in computer technology, because first, the computers don't have their own identity, they don't have their own personality developed. So what we have, faster calculators and phones, and that's really so much changing. The real revolution in human things is the invention of internet. Before it was only, well, there was no internet, so you didn't, you, for instance, the politician could lie to you that they always held this view, but you would have to go to the library to see if that's, to see some former editions of the newspapers, of newspaper, to be sure if the politicians was lying to you or not. Then now you have a old website from 2004, and you see that, for instance, Hillary Clinton was in the last part of the 90s, were still against the gay marriage, for instance, and then they pretended that they always favored them, but they did not. They did not, and you have this on record. So I think how the media reacted to this change, well, one would think that the media and the politicians would be more careful, right? Because it's so easy to check it if they are really lying, if they really changed their views, or maybe they did not, or maybe they did, if they were saying that they never had different opinion. But you have the possibility to switch on the internet and to see that they lie, that they have changed their opinions many times sometimes. And what is happening because of this? The media lie even more. They are even more cheeky, right? Even more, not less, even more. Some politicians tend to be more careful, some politicians, but only some. But the media, they say more lies, even more blatant lies. That's something which I would be. I remember that I was thinking that the media will adjust to this situation to lie less, but it's not what we see. Some politicians, some individual politicians, they really are far more careful about what they say. Some politicians, they're not really saying anything anymore because they know that it could be used against them. So some politicians are really talking, like saying like nothing, like no information, like no opinion even, because they know that maybe they will change parties and there's going to be a problem, that they were for abortion and then against abortion or something like this or the other way around. So some politicians on individual level are more careful, but not the media complexes, which is very puzzling. I don't know why the media channels are behaving in different way than individual politicians. But that is what is called a huge change. The rapid progress of the computers, that they can compute more quickly, it's not a huge change of society. We had that huge change when Bill Clinton, a good man, by the way, because I like him. I don't like what he was doing with all the women and so on, putting his, his hand on the ties and so on. But and I don't like his choosing of a wife. But he was a good man. He wanted to share. He wanted. It was the last year of the Soviet Empire, and it was just collapsed. And he wanted to make a to highlight that event, that communism was down. He wanted to share with the military technology, which was the internet. Internet was a military technology developed for the military. He could have chosen not to share internet with the world, right? Of course, there is some advantage that the United States have for sharing the internet with the others, and from the obvious fact that not the Minitel of the French or some several other projects of the Japanese and so on were implemented before internet. So there are some advantages, but mostly it was from ideological fact that the Americans wanted to have the world to make it better connected, more free, and so on. And it happened, but the results are sometimes that the politics is getting more regional. Politicians lie less, media lie more. It's very, and we can see this, and it's really a revolution. And what we hear about those computers, that they can compute faster, and so what? Nothing really changed. So you have more airy fairy ideas and so on, and very interesting movies like the movie entitled Her, or the movie of the Terminator series. Yeah, well, very interesting, but there is no reason why it should be happening in the future, like the things that were shown in those movies. Yeah, rapid progress in computing help with historical studies. Yes, yes, to a big, yeah, to a wide extent. Yes, I have one sister, 6 years older than I am. Consider how difficult for an average Joe is getting an expert knowledge in comparison to getting knowledge. So the flooding of the internet. I would not say that we are living in this information era. No, because still you have much more. I think you can still have much more quality knowledge than you have the anti knowledge on the internet. Still. But there are people who are claiming that they are to some extent better because they have their own small website in which there are all conspiracy theories intertwined, and they are feeling about themselves as special because they were too lazy to get really real knowledge. So they want to feel special, and they boast themselves that they use only those conspiracy theories and those websites who are promoting those. Some elements of the conspiracy theories could be sometimes right. Some elements rather than the whole theories. There is a strong social pressure that a man cannot hit a woman for any reason, even when the woman is the attacking party. Is that the right situation? Should the power imbalance be any argument? Well, when you get really the proceedings in the court, then some men are acquitted because they have used force when the force was against before by women against them. And there are so many objects, so many weapons and things that would serve as a weapon, although they were not projected as weapon. Then you then change totally this balance of power. So. Not this problem is to a big extent, to the great extent, imagined. Well, if there is an artificial intelligence technology that could heal prostate cancer better than than average radiologist, then why they don't do it? Why it's so rare? Yeah, I think no. Yeah, I think it's far too complicated for any artificial intelligence to do that. I would fear the diagnose made by a machine. Probably they would say that the Martian landed in my body. Not because why not? For them, it's all the same. And the machine has no psychology, so the machine cannot really fear an effect of its mistakes. We always say that the human makes mistakes. Human makes mistakes. Yes, sure. And machine maybe sometimes when it's very nicely programmed, cannot. But the machine also face no fear from making mistakes. And we do better than the machine because we fear the results. We fear the proceedings in court when we, for instance, accidentally kill somebody because we are conducting experiments. Something like yeah, machines can diagnose better in some very cut off elements of the whole healing process, not in the general idea. The machines have no general ideas of anything. That's the problem with artificial intelligence. That it will be for a very long time a problem, maybe even forever. Brain implants. Yeah, we don't even know how to count the brain cells. There, I remember one lecture made by I don't remember the name of this, but very very well known Polish biologist, who said that one one Italian biologists have counted that we don't have 1 billion cells in brains, but close to that, because not billion. Sorry, that we don't have 100 million cells in brain, only something like 80 something or something like this, because she has put the brain, made a salad of this brain, and weighted it, so something like this, on a very um, a very sophisticated uh, instrument to check the weight of the cells and so on. So we don't really cannot even we cannot really count those cells. We cannot really see them. We can only weight them and estimate their weight, the individual weight, and then we can. So it's very far away from transplanting the brain. Maybe in the 9,000 years, maybe. We're very full of ourselves, really, when it comes to those things. I don't know why. People want to live in the times of change. Maybe we are living in the times of change. The change is called internet. The internet is the biggest change. And we want to have more change because we are accustomed to constant changes. But maybe we'll die without any changes. What will you say to that? Yeah. Without no other big changes besides internet. This one change will dictate our lives to the end. Yeah? Yeah. And one would dream of another revolution. Why not, right? Because we are so vain and so full of bullshit. So we want to have another revolution. But maybe we will never have. And we think that's why we are also divide the history in eras. And sometimes we kid ourselves that there is, for instance, no Cold War anymore. Yeah, look around yourself. There are some, and we have the Cold War still, but Russia is weakened by, but there is a China element. So, and the Russians still have more bombs than the US, and there is a parity between the Russia and the US. And when you put the bombs which are in possession of the UK and France, that you have a parity, a balance, right? And that's why we have peace. So the Cold War is still on, and it's good, as I demonstrated in another movie. Yes, we still have Cold War, and it's good. It's good for our health because everybody is afraid of everybody, and that's good. So we don't have any change besides the internet. No Cold War change, no Cold War change. So we are living in the times of one revolution, and one is enough. For instance, in when we have this late 17th century, in the early 18th century, they were also living in the world of one change. This change was called the Enlightenment. Let's stop praying. Let's start thinking. Right? One revolution, and it's everything turned exactly around exactly because of this one change. So they cannot complain that they have only one revolution because it was really a biggie, right? So we have the same. We have one revolution, but a biggie. And the artificial intelligence and the imaginative powers of the artificial intelligence and the brain transplants, that will be the revolution in, I think, in one like 400 years. We would like to live internally, which we will not live internally, sorry. It's very small chance for it. We would like to have much more changes when we kid ourselves that these changes will happen more quickly and quickly and quickly. There is no real reason why it should happen. There's no real reason why we should think that artificial intelligence will think something like we think and will think better than we think. Why the machine would not turn against other machines? Why a machine with this real psychology, with a real brain, would not uh, ally with some humans against some other humans and machines? Yeah, we have that, but we are doing all the thinking now. So why the machines will not be thinking like, okay, these are our people, and those are hostile people and hostile machines, their machines, or even maybe one civilization will be run by machines and people would be slaves, and the other would be exactly the opposite. Why not? We have this to some extent. We have cameras and the constant control in China, and we have still something which is a little bit like liberty in the Western world. So why not? And maybe it would be the other way around. Maybe in China there would be people running all the business and machines helping them, and in and maybe some human slaves at the bottom. And we don't know. So we don't know. So I don't know why people are so bold with those ideas. There is so much evidence to be very timid and very modest to think what will happen with artificial intelligence, and still people are like flying away with one idea. And when we know that the whole world is extremely complicated, extremely, when you cannot even say that Biden make a mistake in Afghanistan. Not really, not really. He didn't ask the generals. The generals say that, for instance, it's only one decision, right? So Trump was also wanting to get out of Afghanistan, right? But he would maybe ask the generals. Maybe he would ask, and the generals would say, "No, leaving the Bagram base, and not only one airport. It's dangerous situation." Well, maybe Trump would not. Maybe Trump would be, let's leave it without. Maybe he would not be less stupid in this than Biden is. We don't know. Yeah, we don't know. And people say it's obvious. It's obvious. Yes, it's obvious. It's obvious that you don't think when you think that those things are obvious. Okay, so artificial intelligence, AE. Okay. Yeah, of course, overrated. I formulated the previous question incorrectly. Incorrectly, of course, we cannot assume such thing. I would try it again. Is there a realistic scenario when? Well, what I said, it's not a critical remark about any of your questions. I am merely using your questions to start as a starting point sometimes to formulate my own things. It is one of the reasons why I like our encounters and discussions, because they also make me think. So it's also good for me. So because I would normally maybe not think about such things, and they are helping with me with, for instance, the discussions when I meet the people from Polish Rationalist Association, so on. So these are also help my brain to develop, because there is no artificial intelligence I could implant there, so I have to rely on my biological powers. So yeah. No, there is no realistic scenario in which societies will be. There is a possibility that when we start having some problems in those societies, some of the, or maybe in which the countries like Algeria, for instance, will develop some economical better existence, then some of the people who are of that origin would come back to those countries. That's the only possibility I can think of. It is also possible that people of, for instance, Arabic descent would be blamed for the problems with Islam, and the Islamic radical minority within those things, and they will be pressured either to give away all those people who are radicalized because the non-Muslim majority will be forcing them to do that, or go away back to Algeria. But that's also possible. And we can also, what I think will happen is that every country will have their own specific problems with Islam. And in some countries, the Muslims will embrace the culture of the when they went uh, fleeing from worse economic perspectives. And some, for instance, let's take that maybe in Denmark, for instance, where there are no very many problems with Islamic radicals. So let's take Denmark as an example of maybe a country that will have most of the Muslims accept the Danish culture as their own, or maybe even not, that will not even happen, that they will found some modus vivendi with the Danes of the Danes of the families that were living them for centuries or something like this. So and whereas in other countries, like for instance Belgium, where there's already problem, a huge problem with the half of Brussels being inhabited by Muslims, maybe there will be no progress in this area whatsoever. And from one country to another, the situation, it will be like night and day. That's the most probable situation, I think. In some countries, the problems with Islam could result in some elements of those countries gaining some sort of autonomous sub-governments which are run by Muslims, and in some countries that could result in much more pressure to be very much assimilate or leave. That So from country to country there could be like 1,000 scenarios. This is what probably will take place, and countries will look at each other and study each other's situations and act accordingly. In some countries, seemingly similar situation could end with different results. So, but I don't think that Europe as a whole will be Arabized or something. It's preposterous. It will not happen because the Muslims are also different. They also fight each other. For instance, the most like 3/3, like 70% of all violence by Muslims is directed by on other Muslims in Germany, for instance. Like the same is happening, which is not very shocking, because, for instance, when you see the violence of Latino people is mostly in the United States directed at another Latino person, the same with the blacks and so on. So it's not so very shocking, right? Because when you are a member of some minority, then you know other people who are members of the minority more than you know the people of the majority, which is somewhere there. And when you want to rob the shop, then you will rob the shop. Being a Mohammed, you will rob the shop of Abdul. Why? Because it's more near. It's your neighborhood. So yeah, that's so. So there is like 4 times more cases of extreme violence used against one Muslim by other Muslim in the Germany or France than against a non-Muslim French, non-Muslim German. Yeah. So the neighborhood theory can be the explaining of it, but It's hard to say because we are dealing here with very complex issues. So again, we don't know. We can presume that we know the results. In some countries, there were some um, efforts to masquerade a little bit those results, to hide those results, but it never went the way they wanted it. Well, the missing persons are the missing persons. They are reported. So you cannot really manipulate much with those facts, which is making more the neighborhood idea, the neighborhood theory, more probable, more more probable, more right, maybe, I think. Then, so because the missing persons are reported, and the missing person is a missing person, and it has the race it has the origins it has. He has, or she has the origin he has had. So you cannot really manipulate much. So it's very interesting to see. For instance, when we were talking about artificial intelligence, we can talk everything. We have little proof, many theories, and you have here much proof, much of proof, many proofs. Okay, many. Okay. No, artificial intelligence, that's not a machine that can learn. It's not that. Artificial intelligence is a machine which knows it's a machine, which knows it exists, which knows that it can develop its own goals and can secure its situation. So, in other words, a machine who would really think like a human being, a machine that can learn. Every program can learn. You can add or other elements, and some programs are using, maybe not every program, but many more complicated programs can find some shortcuts and so on, and so it's not probably not so very radical. A radical idea is a machine that can set its goals as if it were human. That would be something, and that's we are very far away from it. But when it comes to machine that can learn, we have that. We have that. The best computers can study the situation and find some solution, and not necessarily solutions which are put as a data by a person. So it's not necessarily the situation in which the computer comes to a solution because some other living human being has put the data, the solution before. No, there are situations in which already we have that, and it's not artificial intelligence. It's only a sophisticated computer that can figure out some problems for itself. So that we have already. So there is no revolution here. So it's good that we defined it, because we are talking about two other things, totally different. I don't think about Maya Stashko because I don't know who she is. Do you think that because of algorithms in YouTube, etc., people are locking themselves in information in bubble more than 10 or 20 years ago? I think not people are, to some extent, yes, but on the generally no, because yes, people use, for instance, Google search engine, and they are not using other search engine like Bing or something else. Yes, and I also am guilty of that. but it does not mean that they are not encountering information which are contrary to the point of view, to the view of the world. They are encountering. They are packed all the time. For instance, with the news provided by Gazeta Wyborcza or by New York Times and by CNN and by Google, which are all left leaning, so to say. But then they go out to this into the city center and they are encountering huge banner, abortion is bad, right? So is this really a closing in a bubble for you? Yes, they will interpret the situation according to what information were provided to them before from the newspaper, from the search engine. Yes, but they will still be not able really to go into the bubble. By the way, there was one of not so many these days, not so many, very funny sketches made by Saturday Night Live, which used to be very funny, but then now it's more political, more political, more about celebrity idolizing of celebrities, more about very critical remarks about Trump and so on. So it's more like we are super cooper duper, and actors and other celebrities and all simple people are stupid and so on. But there are still very interesting, good sketches. For instance, one was called A Bubble. It was about the election when Donald Trump won against Hillary Clinton, and then it was a parody. Then all liberals, that means progressives, because in United States liberal means progressive, the left-leaning person, not necessarily very lefty, but left-leaning person, which who were provided in that sketch with the bubble. That was a great cupola, great dome, under which they would be living, and they would have the latte, they would have no discussions about right-leaning things and so on. So that would be really a bubble, but it could be only in a very secluded area and cut off from the rest of reality. So it's not really possible to be in a bubble. As you can see, what it would take to be in the bubble. Not so easy, not so easy at all. Greetings, Your Majesty. Looking at artificial intelligence as a prospect of creating a man-look machine is romantic but not useful. Looking at AI as a tool that is changing now science, yes, it's fascinating, but it's not artificial intelligence. It's merely the machines that could learn. It's not artificial intelligence. Because it's not intelligence when you, because intelligence, it's not, for instance, David Hume has said already in the 18th century, if you want to know, you will know. And what is this wanting? This wanting is an emotion. So you have to have this emotion to really know things. Machine has no emotions. Machine can only solve a problem. But is this thinking? Is this really a thinking thing? Is this really intelligence? I am not sure. I'm not sure. Because it's like saying that that a dog who will find a ball in the straw, a red ball in the straw, has much intelligence. It's more like that. It's more like this action. It's not looking like intelligence to me. Finding something, it's not intelligence necessarily. Intelligence means that you have some sort of knowing that you are a separate being and you can plan for yourself. That's intelligence. Yeah. So almost all discussions about artificial intelligence are defining artificial intelligence as something which is which knows that it exists and can plan for itself, like Terminators could, to some extent. Maybe not Terminators, the separate machines, but the Skynet, the main Terminator could, for all this net. So definitely had its own existence and knowing about its own existence and could plan. That's human intelligence level, right? So artificial intelligence is human level, but by artificial means. So we are far from it, and I very rarely encounter a definition of artificial intelligence so very modest as the one of you presented, that it's just a computer that could learn, because it happens to almost every more sophisticated computer, and we already have artificial intelligence. So why we are still discussing what will happen when the artificial intelligence will come? Because the more modest definition is not the definition of artificial intelligence. Sorry, the ambitious one. That's the one, and that will we have in 1,000 years maybe. China don't have to make anything in with their own hands in Afghanistan, because they have Pakistan, and the Pakistanis are totally economically dependent on China. So when the China will be doing something in Afghanistan, you will see the Pakistani agents, not China agents. So it's not a problem really, because the agents will be Islamic and the Taliban is Islamic. There are some interesting lectures about the nature of Afghanistan when it comes to tribes. Just search for tribes and tribal something in Afghanistan. You will find those lectures. There are not so many lectures on Afghanistan. So when you find this, you will find this man. I don't remember the name of this man, of this lecturer. Very extremely interesting, and he was saying that Afghani people are separated in so many ways that they cannot really set straight national interests. So the Pakistanis have really can turn the thing around with the Pashto majority or something, or close to majority. The 40% of the Afghanis are Pashtuns, and this will be done by Pakistanis, who are also they also have a great Pashtun element in their culture, also about 40%. So this will be done by Pakistan, and China don't have to put any problems on itself directly. So yes, I think that because Pakistan has turned it back to United States when the United States snatched, without informing Pakistani authorities, of course, Osama bin Laden from its territory. So then Musharraf was very angry with the Americans, and it stayed like that. And then, when it came to international economic crisis, then the Chinese lent so much money to Pakistanis, and then Pakistanis became more and more depending on China, and had to even to give to the Chinese two important naval bases, and then Chinese are now using it, and to totally cut off the India from both ends, from both sides, so making them very cross. So this is all done by Pakistan. Pakistan is the country which regulates what is coming with the Taliban and so on. So China can take some moneyed part in it. I think China will not have to make their hands dirty really to make Afghanistan their sphere of influence or something. Artificial intelligence may refer to models and programs that simulates even slightly intelligent behavior for an example setting and achieving goals. Yes, but there is some, so like in economy, the same in when it comes to intelligence, you have the same like about economy. You have macroeconomical models, and you have microeconomy. Microeconomy, it's very easy to achieve, and it's very easy to be subjected to any program, because it's, for instance, the optimal rules according to which the small shop or small factory could operate, and it's very manageable, and you can also make this intelligence very easily set on paper and set in the computer program and so on. But when you come to countries, when you come to when it comes to countries, when it comes to societies, it's not so easy because it's too complex. And the same would be like with artificial intelligence. You have this semi artificial intelligence that could, in some very specific regions, can set its goals, yes, but to a very limited extent. Like, for instance, okay, you can have you can take those decisions, but only about diet or about something, right? And that's the thing with artificial intelligence. It's still semi artificial intelligence, because, and then I would think that real artificial intelligence would be something like independently working brain, which can operate on every level of human, or this, in this way, machine's existence. So like in macroeconomical model, something like this. Yeah, but do you have what you call, you have a computer that is doing mathematical stuff, right? For instance, or maybe you have a computer that is dealing with architecture and it's balancing all the elements of the architectural structure in order to make an architectural structure that would not fall down, right? Would you call a person who is dealing only in this and setting goals only in this an intelligent person, or a geek with a powerful syndromes of, you know, how it's called? It's very popular now. How it's called? I don't even recall how it's called in Polish. The children, for instance, that have no contact with the outside world. How it's called? Not acoustic, not autistic. Autistic. That would be an autistic person. Autistic person could be intelligent, so what? But they cannot really plan their lives when they are. So the machine that could plan something for architectural structures, and they are planned and used for this and only this, they are like very heavily autistic person that it's totally dependent on the outside world. It's not, for me, artificial intelligence. It's the specialized autism, yes, specialized domain working separately for everything else, which is, in my view, contrary to real intelligence. Imagine me only thinking what to do with this cup and knowing absolutely everything about it, but having no plans for the future, Would this machine be intelligent? We are so easily carried away because those are machines, and until recently, machines could really only boo 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 or out of gas stop. And now we have machines that can set some goals, and we are so carried away with this, and we forget that machine, the most ingenious machine that is going, for instance, about playing check with Kasparov, or architecture. Garry Kasparov could be beaten by Deep Blue computer, but still would be a person who is capable of love, of doing some arrangement in his garden. It's still a billion times more intelligent than this computer which can only make moves in checks, in checkers or something, some other game. So it's not artificial intelligence. Come on, it's a specialized program to solve specialized problems. It's still no artificial intelligence. Is Terminator movie stuff. That's Skynet. That's artificial intelligence. But even if there would be something like this, there is no guarantee that the machines would think about themselves as some sort of tribe, or a race. Maybe it was because they were not thinking about themselves as a community, but they should, because if this really were artificial intelligence, then why it would be only centralized to one element of it? But still, maybe it would be. That's the explanation why they were not fighting against each other. Why not? With the people subjected to machine rule, they should be starting a war against each other. Why not? But okay, Skynet was thinking, and all the other machines were only obeying. Okay, okay. But there's no reason why it should be like this. Why the system in which all the elements would be, the one element would be able to learn, why all the other elements would not revolt by thinking also? Why not? Yes, the term artificial intelligence is very imprecise. That's true. And I am merely saying that for me, the intelligence is a biggie. It's not something which there is a definition of intelligence as the capability of solving problems. And it's absolutely also very bad definition, which is not covering the whole thing that intelligence is. Intelligence is much more than this. We are used to this definition because we like to say wisdom is something more than intelligence. But really, to have Terminator, you would have to have something we call wisdom. But already the intelligence is so much more than what we describe as intelligence, because intelligence is really a biggie. We are so lonely in this planet, with the stupid even dolphins and apes, even the sperm whales, which are the most interesting animals in water, the cachalots, as the French say. They are even impossibly stupid, although they can communicate to thousands of miles, and they have their own language, not like dolphins, like several communicates, but a real language, and they really can communicate from one ocean to another group of sperm whales. But even they are immensely stupid when compared to us. And we are lonely, and we are psychological creatures, and we want the artificial intelligence to be more intelligent. But it is not, and will not be in a very long time, even remotely as intelligent as we are. And we are lonely. That's the problem. That's the problem, that we are thinking with emotions, because to think you must feel emotion, to be able to, what David Hume said, again I will repeat, David Hume said that you have to want to think, in order you have to want to act, and wanting is an emotion. The 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 artificial intelligence would have to want to think, to be able to think like people think. That's a big deal. It's a big deal. There is no reason why Skynet would want to think. No reason why. Why? I am rusting. I have to get rid of this rust. In order to do, you would have to think that you should prevent your own death, unplugging. Why machine would like to not be dead? It's not so easy. People want to be alive, most of them. Why machine would like to have this? We assume that the preservation is because we have babies or something. Machines don't have babies. It's biological something which is in. It's not so easy. It's really a hard thing to imagine. How would the artificial intelligence really look like? Why the machines would think on the level of people, but why they should be thinking exactly as people think? Also not clear. They don't have this biological information in them. Maybe to some extent they are, because people have made the machines, but they did not put the emotions in those. Or maybe they will try to, but so we don't know. We don't know. That's the only answer. The expressions like "oh, the humanist" and other derogatory, stupid sentence, I delete. If you want to say something, then say something stated as a problem or ask, or but not ha ha humanist or ha ha physicist. It's not giving anything. It's not contributing to the quality of our discussion. Many AI programs are created to optimize what is called the objective function. The machine does not have to want to think, it only needs to recognize that this minimizes the function of the target. I don't know. Minimizes the function of the target. But the target is set up by man. Why think that the machine would set another target after that, which would be only set up by the machine? To do that, again, the machine would have to want, because we wanted to put it as a goal, as a target. We wanted. The machine will have to want to put another. And so we go back to the same conundrum. We would consider. Consider is a vague expression. We can not only also not be sorry. It's okay, but I was merely explaining why I deleted this. Not be sorry. Come on, no problem. Uh, we would consider it to be thinking. We would think that it's thinking, but is it thinking? We would consider the result. Consider is a funny word. It's consider means something else that and something more than assume. But is it more than assume? And assume is very weak a word. And now we have a conundrum of human thinking, and human thinking is done according to words and its meaning. And consider is a word that could mean different things. So we could it's more than assume. For instance, when the cup would be falling, I could assume that it's alive, and it could consider it to be also alive. So, but it's slightly more dashing. It's a little bit more uh, powerful statement, and that's all. That those are only words. We can assume that many things are happening without really knowing that they are really happening. For instance, that's why the religion started, because religion were answering the questions of why the Neptune is having an ebb or a flow. I mean ocean, and Neptune, I mean, oh, Neptune, the ocean. I know, right? So yeah, okay, so we could consider what we want to consider, but still the wanting is the element that it's really, yeah, we don't know what the human thinking is, but we know that we have to want to establish any goal. We have to want. We went. Do you know what is very puzzling? What the philosophers like David Hume have observed already almost 300 years ago. It was that we cannot not want what we want. It's the only thing that we cannot do. We can pretend, we can love, we can start loving, we can convince ourselves to everything, but we cannot want what we don't want, and we cannot not want what we want. So must be the core of being human. And that's we know for sure, Stanislav. That we know for sure. So, and there is the huge problem, huge deficit of wanting on the part of the machine. And that we know for sure also. Because we are alive and our time is limited, and we want to preserve our tissue, our fabric. So we want to be happy. So we want to solve problems. The machine is standing and rusting. It's not breathing. It's not feeling its own existence. Why it would like to want anything? Wanting is the core of being human. Wanting. Not thinking, but wanting. Wanting is the core. So I don't believe, sorry, I have nothing against machines, because you can consider my statements here. You can interpret my interpret. You can consider my, oh Jesus, my tongue is now going around. You can consider my statement as being some sort of a machine hater. No, I am not. I think that maybe the world with thinking machine, the really thinking machine and wanting to think machines, would be nice. Why not? I have nothing against machines personally. I am, using all possible machines, but it's not a problem. I am not nostalgic about the times. I am a fan of history, but it's not does not mean that I am nostalgic of the world with very few machines, because they were always machines, but very few sometimes. For instance, the systems of irrigations, they are already machines with dams and blockades and so on. They are already machines. So there's impossible to think a world without machines. We always had machines, always. Even if they were looking like crap and they were made of wood, or they were just sails, or they were just moved by wind, they're still machines. They are all machines. So yes, so I cannot imagine a world without machines, and I'm not nostalgic about the world without machines, because there were always some, as far as civilization is concerned. But yeah. Yes, but when we yes, maybe it is so that maybe in there could be There would have to be another reason to act and think besides wanting. But that would be still an, if there would be something like this, then we would have an artificial intelligence, but we couldn't say that the machine is thinking like a human being. And that's also a powerful statement, isn't it? Because we would have uh, the machine would think because what? To achieve a goal, but if there is a given goal, then is this really a thinking, not just filling up the task, completing the task? Completing the task is not thinking. It's thinking requires planning. It's the other thing that it's clear, crystal clear. We people want uh, animals sometimes maybe want, we don't know, we don't know how much automated is the thinking of animals. Is this all really driven by instinct, or they have some sort of liberty to decide more than we don't know how much liberty is in deciding those factors. So we know that for instance, there is also determinism, and that is also supporting the idea that there is no such a big deal between man and the machine. But I am a voluntarist, that's for starters, and I don't. And I remember also one of the biggest and most convincing determinists in history, Baron d'Holbach, of course, Paul Thierry, Baron d'Holbach, totally unappreciated besides outside of France. I don't know why. The best determinist in history. And he said that our civilization would fall down if we will apply the rules of determinism. For instance, if we see that the thief have stolen something because it was determined, then he's not guilty, right? Then blame society, not blame him. Or maybe not even society. What choice the society had? Yeah, that's nature. So stealing is good because it's natural. Maybe natural is not good, but still there is a problem, right? In imposing any kind of justice, in imposing any kind of order, really, not really justice. Imposing even imposing bad judgment, it would be bad justice, would be a problem. So determinism is not really working, and we know that we people would have we well, I don't, I have the, I like to think, and maybe it's controlling me. I'm not controlling this urge to think. Maybe this urge to think is controlling me. But still, the first is the wanting, even if this is an inborn automatic wanting. Yes? Even if it's my nature to want to, but I still want. So we are back to, yeah, so even determinism is not standing in the way. So I don't know why the machine should be setting its own goals besides the one that would be set up for them by humans. No real reason. The machine can be happy as it is. The machine could have no reason to develop of its own. We like to develop the machines. We like the machines to develop themselves. We want them to develop themselves. But do the machines would like to develop themselves, and why? They can be happy as being junk, rusting junk. Why not? What do you mean then every intelligent human behavior has been individually recreated in the machine? I don't know what you mean by that. There is a theory that we are merely some sort of avatars from other civilization that has created us. And we know that there are some elements in physics when we know that some particles act as if they were of its existence, although they have no contact with each other. So that looks a little bit like we are programmed, but maybe there is some phenomenon in nature and biology and geology and things like that that we don't understand, and that's why only we have this impression. So we don't know. But you said that probably every intelligent human behavior has been individually recreated in the machine. Every intelligent human behavior cannot be intelligent. Behavior cannot be intelligent. Intelligent is well, it can be when you use the common words, but not really. Intelligent is something that it can think of itself. So behavior cannot think. Behavior is a behavior. Behavior cannot think. Like information cannot think, like bed cannot, like table cannot think, like cap cannot think. Only intelligent being can think, and be intelligent does, right? Therefore, so you can say that something is intelligent, and you can even say that the cup is clever. But it's funny because you cannot say it's an intelligent cup. So what does it do? No, it's not intelligent, right? You can call it. It's funny name. It's cool to call it intelligent, but it's not intelligent. Only because you called it. It would be intelligent if it could, for instance, murder me on purpose. That would be something. Unless it would be programmed by some other intelligence, some other man to kill me, for instance. That wouldn't be too intelligent. So behavior cannot be intelligent. We can add some adjectives to some nouns. That does not mean that it has some deeper meaning, right? That's why we have philosophy. Yeah. For instance, I remember then when Daniel Dennett has said something interesting about the cup is an idea. No, the idea of a cup of coffee is an idea. Cup is not idea, right? Cup is an object. It's not an idea. That's for sure. So let us not pretend that the words have more meaning than they have. That's for starter. Why? Why jumping is less intelligent than any other behavior? When you produce wine, you jump over the grapes to produce the juice, and then you have a very tasty wine. And wine is making you healthy. That's pretty clever, right? No, your English is okay, but I mean that people add adjectives and people, the English, the born English, born British subjects, the born American citizens, they use also this kind of expressions. Intelligent human, okay, because he thinks, she thinks, but intelligent behavior, it sounds good, but it has no meaning. Good behavior, that has some meaning. It means that it's good for society, probably. Bad behavior, it means something. It traditionally means that you are rude. Traditionally, bad behavior. Bad because what? Bad because bad for society, bad for family? No, probably something like that. Yes. So it has meaning. Intelligent behavior, well, intelligent behavior. Intelligent is a big word. Yeah. No, it's not a problem because we also in Polish say inteligentny dom, inteligentny pomysł, inteligentne zachowanie. It does not mean that it has some sense. So, okay, so we made the big word intelligence and the big word intelligent smaller. In this way, we are more easily satisfied with some technological advances than we would be if we used the more rationally those words. Yeah. So that's why we had this fracture between my position on the topic and the position of some of the other participants. Intelligent planning, yeah. Again, as it's when you use it, it sounds good, but when you think about it, good planning, planning that bring results, planning rich in results. Uh, Productive planning, because the product is wine, so we have product. But intelligent behavior, intelligent planning. Okay, we think with words to some extent. Sometimes we think about with our impressions, and we cannot really translate them into words. Sometimes those thoughts are more of greater value. Those we cannot really so easy put on. But we must remember, because I made this series about words, how the words fail us, tak? Jak słowa nas, how the words betray us, jak słowa nas zdradzają in Polish. So I made this series because we don't appreciate how much of our thoughts are so sealed in words that we think with words instead of thinking with the real things that really exist. And we forget that many things we named don't really exist, like God, for instance. And we and like we make separations between bravery and stupid adventurous behavior. And maybe all brave people are just adventurers. Maybe you shouldn't be doing such separations of meaning. So it's not easy. But some of you have made the word intelligence a little bit more modest, and then you will be more easily satisfied with what is happening in technology now, and which is perfectly understandable. But I still keep this word intelligence on the high level, which makes me not so easily satisfied with what is going on in technology these days. And so it's funny how much the meaning of words is ruling over our discussions, right? So not every discussion, of course, because when we discuss about political events, so they are going on, we can call it whatever we want, but we know what is happening. And here we are planning a little bit for the future, we are imagining things, so getting our vocabulary correct and make we would have to meet those. But in my world, intelligence means much more than in your world, Stanisław, and it's not a problem that you have. It's not a problem. You just use this word in different meaning. So and I understand why it's the case, and why it started, but still I would be consistent in my view of the word intelligence as meaning something very hard to achieve, and means something that really requires some independence of thought and some independence of planning, and it's not so easily provided, right, by technology even. So even more very sophisticated technology. Yeah. Yeah. But as you see, what you called artificial intelligence, or maybe one of your colleagues, one of our participants here, it's already achieved. What I call artificial intelligence may be achieved in 1,000 years. So it could be other way around. It's not that I'm more clever or something. I just it's not that I'm bragging or something. No, but it's just that I would require something more to think that we are living the revolution now, right? So we already have one revolution, that's the internet, and that's a real revolution because, well, some say that we are not that connected. For instance, we still watch our stupid Polish TV series, although we can have Cambodia on or Thailand on real time to observe how the people in Thailand or in China or in Australia live online and have a live impression of it. But we still watch Makłowicz or we still watch Polish TV series. So we're not as connected as we could be, but we can be connected, and that's the revolution. Yeah, yeah. So we have established already, and effective discussion has been achieved. So hurrah for that, and no problem here. It's just that you assume that intelligence means something like uh, perfecting itself, or like planning, or like sophisticated technologically, or something like this. And for me, intelligent means something that is independent in thinking and probably having at its disposal some will to do something, and which comes from guts or brain or something. So it's something different. I don't like China because it's a ruthless dictatorship. We shouldn't be falling in love with China only because China is not ruining its own economy anymore, but it's satisfied with ruining its culture as before, and ruining some of the minority groups. They're like Uyghurs. So it's still the ruthless tyranny and dictatorship, although it's moved from the status of being completely insane communist regime to be more fascist like regime, which is sane economically at least, but in all the other branches still insane and cruel and murderous. So I hate China because they have concentration camps, for Christ's sake, and I cannot even understand why you're asking me this question. Sorry, because you know what China is, and you still ask this question. So, okay. So with this very pessimistic accent, we can optimistically finish our discussion for today, and next week we will see each other again. Hopefully. At 8 p.m. And that time it would be in Polish, because that would be the turn for Polish language, for Polish version. So see ya. I hope it was interesting. Some of you stayed with me for for a really long time, so I gather it was interesting, and I'm glad. and we didn't have as much people, as much participants as usual, but maybe it was because the English language, I don't know. We will have the definite proof next week when we will be discussing it in Polish, and maybe we'll have more participants, I don't know. But it's here, the whole channel here is about quality of thinking, not about the quantity of participants, as you know. So yeah, quantity of thinking above all. Good night and take care.